There are some things you usually never see video game bosses doing. One of the big ones that would often logically happen would be paperwork. We go now to Dracula's castle from, well, Castlevania. Dracula's sitting in his living quarters, looking over a database of his employees, when he suddenly notices conflicting information about one death, alias the Grim Reaper. His legal guardians are supposed to be one William S. Preston Esquire and Theodore Logan, due to them winning ownership through their chosen competition of mostly children's board games. But there's also paperwork that mentions two others, Billy and...
Okay, seems alright so far. I don't see any last name here, so I assume this is the same... Wait, Mandy? What is a Mandy?
No, not a miserable little pile of secrets. They seem to have also won one of his top employees through a game of their own. This doesn't seem to make sense. After a few phone calls, Dracula has arranged the court case to decide the true owners of the Grim Reaper. Both duos of Bills and enter Dracula's courtroom, introducing themselves to the judge. Bill and Ted shout, "And we are Wild Stallions!" followed by an air guitar after their names are said. Meanwhile, after they're introduced, Billy simply picks his nose and laughs, and Mandy questions why Dracula looks different.
Well, all our deaths look different anyways. But besides that, you will all get to make your cases for why you should retain legal ownership of death over the other two. And you will get to call up to 5 others to vouch for you, as well as use any other resources that you can that will further your case.
So yes, for our viewers, that means time travel is allowed, as well as anything else that can be applied for either of them, as long as you think it'd help convince Dracula. With everything said, which duo comes out of this court case still retaining ownership of the Grim Reaper?
Hey everyone, Brandon here again, and I've brought some excellent points as to why the Wild Stallions would more than likely win this case over the custody of the Grim Reaper. Before my friend Ribbit can use this as an argument against me, it's clear as day that Mandy holds an intellectual advantage over everyone here. Well, except maybe Rufus, but I'll get to him in a bit. Even the two Grim Reapers in question are pretty stupid. I mean, who would choose Colonel Mustard in a game of Clue? But back to Mandy. As while she is indeed intelligent, mental fortitude has no dominion over the fine print and details of a court case. These details in question being what their deals with death specifically were. Grimm's deal with Billy and Mandy was for him to be their best friend upon losing to them in a game, whereas Death himself became Bill and Ted's full-on slave, though I use that word kinda sparingly, as he seems pretty alright with his fate, even performing music with the Bodacious Bros. Plus, this is a case over who owns Death, the Grim Reaper. In Bill and Ted's world, there is only one Death. In Billy and Mandy's world, it's actually a mantle, not a strict being. In Billy and Mandy's Big Boogie adventure, Grim was stripped of his powers and Billy and Mandy had to fight to the bitter end with the Boogeyman to retrieve their friend's powers back. This lies the key, that in Billy and Mandy's universe, the Grim Reaper is a mantle with set powers, not an immortal harbinger of death that perpetuates their duties for all of time, like most incarnations. Fucking number 3 from Kids Next Door became the new Reaper for crying out loud. So even if you say Billy and Mandy own Grim, which again they're only binding him as best friends, they own Grim, not the Grim Reaper or Death itself. And last I checked, no one owns their best friend. That's just a toxic relationship. Calling back to Rufus, he could even help the boys play against Billy and Mandy if they wanted to, using his time machine. No, I'm not gonna suggest they do the baby Thanos thing to Billy and Mandy, just preventing them from ever meeting Grim in the first place. You can argue they wouldn't know where to look, but oh yeah, it's a time machine. They have more than enough time to get back without them even noticing. And look, all Dracula needs to do now is look at his scriptures and see Billy and Mandy's names aren't there anymore. Billy and Mandy, like a certain other skeleton says, "We'll get that, He-Man!" What, you thought I was gonna say have a bad time? Well, you're right.
Hello, this is Ribbit, here to debate for Billy and Mandy. Instead of focusing on the legal stuff, however, I want to focus on what Dracula and the Monster Court would hope for. Dracula is an evil being, and doesn't like humans very much. Since Dracula isn't canonically a judge, it's assumable that bias would shine through in some cases. More than a regular judge at least. So, while I don't think he'd like Billy, Mandy, Bill or Ted, he'd still be far more willing for the Grim Reaper to go to Billy and Mandy, who have used Grim to do some messed up things. I bet Dracula would really appreciate actions like that, as opposed to doing rock concerts with the embodiment of evil. Sure, Grim is only their best friend, not their slave, but I feel like Dracula would actually want to keep it the way that it is in Billy and Mandy's world. while Grim is still free to reap souls, alter reality, and cause chaos on a whim. This is for who owns the Grim Reaper, so Billy and Mandy are still going to have every right to own the Grim Reaper if they do win the court case. They'll just own whoever becomes the next Grim Reaper if Grim does lose his mantle. So I think Mandy's intellect will play into this. Sorry, but that quick attempt to stop that argument from coming through will not work. Mandy is a massive help here, no matter what way you slice it. Mandy and Billy are the only people with experience in this kind of situation. This circumstance is literally based on a Billy and Mandy episode. Mandy knows her stuff when it comes to debating for her right to own Grim. So not only does she have a major advantage in smarts, but also an experience in a courtroom. You need to be able to twist others' words and manipulate things, at least in a courtroom ran by multiple evil creatures. Rufus is smart, but Mandy's manipulative. She isn't above cheating. This is where my main arguments lie. Billy and Mandy have way more ways to mess with the other team. Sure, Bill and Ted can go back in time, but Mandy has the ability to stop time itself. She could view Bill and Ted's arguments, take their time machine, or even just escape. The stopwatch works in Castlevania, so these monster folks are clearly vulnerable to this kind of stuff. Not only that, but Billy and Mandy can people's heads and control them. Rufus in particular would be a very useful person to take out of the picture. If Rufus suddenly turns on Bill and Ted, well, they've lost their team's smartest member, making Mandy's cunning all the more useful. With how easy it would be to manipulate a duo like Bill and Ted, I believe that Billy and Mandy will be able to pull through, even if they're fighting against the way that things are jotted down.
You make some strong points for Billy and Mandy, and I can agree Dracula wouldn't want his most loyal servants in the hands of these two, well, stupid teenagers. But you know whose will opposes and is far greater than Dracula's? God himself. Yes, the God. No Mortal Kombat shit where it's a fake god. Not Butter Samurai either. The God. Bill and Ted actually talked to him, and Death straight up told God that he got Melvined by them. So where am I going with this? You blow off the focus on legal stuff extremely dismissively, but when God himself is on the Stallion's side, he can quite literally give them, well, divine intervention. Mandy is smart, and the two could toy with their opposition, but do you really think Dracula has the patience for all of this? You boast about how intelligent Mandy is, but you also fail to realize Billy is the major thorn in her side. If he ends up telling Dracula, Grim is our best friend, Dracula will scoff at him. The two are, in the words of the Shredder, babies! Whereas Bill and Ted at least have Rufus on their side to give them some respect. Dracula has shown to respect intellectual humans before, like his late wife Lisa. And again, this is without mentioning the two boys have been aided by God himself, with him even going as far to resurrect them. In the absolute worst case scenario, Billy and Mandy win, but they ask God for another favor as they lost unfairly, and Dracula will shit himself in the face of the creator. All Bill and Ted would have to do is beat Death in another set of games, which, if you ask me, Death would probably more than likely lose on purpose this time, as he likes Bill and Ted. If Dracula gets a little battered and bruised by crosses and whips infused with God's power, imagine how he'd feel about two boys who have basically befriended God. The point isn't that God is going to step in and stop Dracula, it's that he himself has an anecdote and proof that Death, not Grim, but the entire metaphysical concept of the Grim Reaper, is theirs. I rest my case. You may be a king or a little street sweeper, but sooner or later, you dance with the Reaper.
Get down with your bed, sir.
My dismissive ways of approaching the lawful side of this was not ignorance, but rather I simply think Bill and Ted owning the more specific idea of Death, and of course the fact that he was their slave as opposed to their best friend, isn't as big of a deal as you say. The ownership of Death is up for grabs. It's not just who owns them before instantly getting full ownership. God's word is helpful for sure, but that's also assuming he'd show up. Bill and Ted had to go through quite a lot of faff to actually talk to God. He's clearly not got his eyes on Death 24/7, or they wouldn't have had to mug 3 people and dress up as them. I guess it's also kind of debatable if Dracula would fear this god, who, as far as I know, lacks any feats on the low multiversal scale like Dracula. So even if Bill and Ted did decide to go talk to God about what happened, it has a chance of backfiring if you ask me. As for Billy, yeah, he's going to be more of a nuisance than anything, but Mandy is still a mature and kind of evil person in some cases. Rufus is also an intelligent but also nicer person. I feel if Dracula is going to respect anyone here, it will be Mandy. And besides, Mandy's the only one here with a way to quickly dispose of the opposition. Not just on Bill and Ted's side, but hers too. What if she got Billy to take over Rufus's mind? Then, Billy would be a thorn in Bill and Ted's side instead of hers. In this case, Mandy, a despicable and experienced individual in a courtroom at least, would be going up against 3 silly Billies, literally in one case. And if Billy was competent enough to continue fighting for Mandy's side, then it would be even worse for Bill and Ted. But of course, for my final argument, what if they got Wiggy Jiggy Jed, or better yet, Billy's dad, to the stand?
Dad?
Can't you see I'm busy, Billy?
But it's important.
What is it?
Don't call me some street sweeper. My side are from the land of the dead, and our dark side royalty. They're far renowned in the underground, and you can't take that away from me. No, you cannot take that away from me.
Now the court is taking recess before we decide our verdict.
We will now leave it up to the jury, that would be you folks, to help us reach a conclusion.
Be sure to leave some comments as usual. The most interesting, relevant, and entertaining ones will help us in the second part of this matchup.
Also, even though they aren't here in this episode, you can still check out Max and Ducko's Patreon and Col-Fi pages, as well as mine and Brandon's pages as well, linked in the description.
And a hint for next time, it should be fantastic. Trying not to be too obvious.
Bye for now, guys!